All right. We're going to go ahead and get into this story about Max Blumenthal. If you have not seen this, hold on. So Max Blumenthal actually had questions for the State Department about the genocide issue. And I think he makes a great comparison here. And I'm actually going to connect this to the statement that Anna Kasparian made recently, because there is a connection. So let's get started with this clip here from Max Blumenthal. It says the Gray Zone's Max Blumenthal asked the State Department why Tony Blinken and Joe Biden have accused nations of genocide, which have killed far less than Israel has in Gaza in 1 month. So listen to this. This is a good question.
And in March 2021, Secretary Blinken accused China of the crime of genocide for its alleged treatment of the Uyghur minority, but he didn't accuse them of killing on any mass scale or forcible transfer. Now we see with Israel's military assault on Gaza, something like every 200 people in the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. Over 4,000 children killed. The Ministry of Intelligence, as Sam pointed out, in Israel has published a blueprint for the forced transfer of the entire Palestinian population to Egypt. We have the intent to commit genocide expressed at the highest level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself, referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek.
Let's pause here and let's go back to the part here about the Uyghurs, because this piece right here is very important.
Of the Uyghur minority, but he didn't accuse them of killing on any mass scale or forcible transfer. Now we see with Israel's military assault on Gaza, something like every 200 people in the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. Over 4,000 children killed. The Ministry of Intelligence, as Sam pointed out, in Israel has published a blueprint for the forced transfer of the entire Palestinian population to Egypt. We have the intent to commit genocide expressed at the highest level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself, referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek.
Okay, let me just point out what he's talking about there. I think it was probably almost 2 years ago now. I think it was almost 2 years ago was the first time I talked about the Uyghurs. This was a population in China where the U.S. government said that China had committed genocide against the Uyghur people. At that point in time, I showed on the show the statement from the State Department in China, and the State Department was basically saying that there was no evidence of proof or to prove that genocide of the Uyghurs was actually taking place. I've actually interviewed independent journalists that have covered this story as well. And they also said, like, don't you think if there was a genocide, people would have heard about this, that kind of thing. To Max's point, the fact that the Biden administration or the State Department was willing to point out the fact that there is this supposed genocide of the Uyghur people in China, but they're not willing to do that in reference to the Palestinians in Gaza, it's very telling. And my assumption is because the United States backs Israel unequivocally and has unwavering support, as they've said, for Israel, that's part of it. They're connected in reference to Israeli intelligence. They're connected in reference to, oil, the money that's sent to Israel, etc. But when it comes to China, the U.S. government doesn't consider China to be an ally. So it's easier for them to say that there is a genocide that's being committed against the Uyghur people, and China's doing this because that is someone that the U.S. government sees as the enemy, not as an ally. But when it's a country that the U.S. government sees as an ally and the U.S. government feels like they actually need, they're not going to be willing to come forward and make that same statement. That's my assumption about this. But this is a great point that Max is bringing up, and he's bringing up examples that point to just that the plan is a genocide of Palestinian people.
Level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself, referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek, the biblical Amalek. So I wonder, when you're accusing one country of genocide without accusing them of mass killing, and then blocking ceasefires to enable another country's military assault, what metric are you using to determine genocide, or is this just political rhetoric?
It's certainly.
So the question is, what metric are you using to determine whether or not genocide is actually happening? And then this also brings up the issue with the UN, because the UN and other human rights organizations have repeatedly, as far as I've seen over the past couple years, have called out the dire situation that the Palestinian people are enduring in Gaza multiple times. They said this is a humanitarian crisis. The director of the UN chapter in New York actually resigned because of the killing of the Palestinian people. And he stated in a long letter explicitly what was happening to those people. So this is just something to keep in mind, that there have been multiple organizations and other agencies that have said this is what is happening to the Palestinian people. And there is evidence and there are reports, and the US government still will not say that this is a genocide that's happening to them. So Max asks, what are the metrics?
Genocide, or is this just political rhetoric?
It's certainly not political rhetoric. The department, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, we have a rigorous process in place for evaluating whether something constitutes as genocide or not. And
what is the process? He said they have a rigorous process that is in place, whether or not something constitutes as a genocide or not. What's the process? And where can we find this information? Those of us, the American people, where can we find this information so we can review this process for ourselves? I feel like that should be public information.
And that is true in any country that that situation might be being looked at. That is not a term that we have assessed pertains to this current conflict. We are, of course, monitoring the evolving situation and are examining facts as they develop. This continues to be an incredibly challenging and fraught situation, but it's also important to remember that Hamas bears responsibility for sparking this war. They have brought this tragic war to Gaza.
Okay, well, President.
So the first mistake that he made is he's bringing this back to October 7th as though this started on October 7th. That's the first mistake that this gentleman is making. He's just going to ignore all the humanitarian issues that have happened to the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip before October 7th. And all of them are doing this, by the way. All of them are doing these talking points because they don't want to have to answer to what the state of Israel did to the Palestinian people prior to October 7th. So there's that. Just keeping it real. That is not Sagar. You guys are funny. Casey, come on. Stop. Oh, man. But this is something that I'm noticing repeatedly that they just continue to do. Let's just, start on October 7th. And I want to ask you a question. Let's pretend it was the other way around. If it were 10,000 Israelis that were killed, would the U.S. government consider that to be a genocide? And if so, if that's the case, then that means that they value one group of people over the other, which is essentially what is happening.
Biden has accused the Russian government of genocide for its actions in Ukraine, where in 2 years it has killed as many civilians as Israel has killed in 1 month in the Gaza Strip. So how do you account for that disparity where you're assisting one country and accusing the other of genocide when the country you're assisting has systematically killed so many more people in 1 month?
Those circumstances are totally and completely not the same, and to make a comparison like that, candidly, is incredibly inappropriate.
Yeah, they're not the same, because one example in reference to Ukraine involves killing European people, and the other example involves killing brown people who just happen to be, most of them happen to be Muslim. Like, I can't unsee this thing now that since you said this, you guys, since you said the Sagar thing, I can't unsee this. This is bad.
Circumstances are totally and completely not the same, and to make a comparison like that, candidly, is incredibly inappropriate. We have been, please don't interrupt me. We have been, have raised directly with the Israeli government about the need to distinguish between Hamas terrorists and Palestinian civilians. This is something that the secretary has raised directly on his travels. We even laid out that we believe that there are commitments that can be made additionally on dealing with protecting civilian life more effectively. And we're watching very closely to make sure that happens.
But you've referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. Doesn't that blur the distinction between civilians and militants?
We have not referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. We have said
that is a lie. That is a blatant lie. How many times have you seen them, the State Department? And remember, mainstream media repeats the talking points from the State Department. How many times have you seen them use that exact phrase? How many times have you seen our politicians use that exact phrase in interviews? That they're using these people as human shields. How many times? This is a blatant lie. We're going to call him Dime Store Sagar. Can we call him that, since you guys pointed out he looks like a fake Sagar? We're going to call Dime Store Sagar is blatantly lying here.
Human shields. Doesn't that blur the distinction between civilians and militants?
We have not referred to Palestinian civilians as human shields. We have said that Hamas is using Palestinian civilians as human shields. That is not hyperbole. That is something that we have seen Hamas do as they continue to integrate themselves into key civilian infrastructure.
They've actually seen them do this? They've actually seen them do that?
Across Gaza.
Wouldn't that be blurring the distinction between civilians and combatants? If you say Hamas is using civilians as human shields, wouldn't that be in some ways justifying the killing of civilians because they happen to be in the way, in their homes?
There is no one in this administration that is justifying killing of civilians.
That's a damn lie. That is a damn lie. That is a lie. We have heard that from multiple politicians. Multiple politicians, you guys. This is a mess. This is a mess. Dime Store Sagar.
There is no one in this administration that is justifying killing of civilians. Any civilian life loss is incredibly troubling, heartbreaking to us. Any number above 0 is deeply troubling to us. What we are doing.
If the loss of civilians was deeply troubling to them, they would call for a ceasefire. The loss of those civilians is not deeply troubling to them. They care more about the Israeli civilians than they do about the Palestinian ones. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Look at the way they just censured, and I had many criticisms of Rashida Tlaib, but look at the way they just censured Rashida Tlaib, who's the only Palestinian in Congress. Look at how they did that. But yet, at the same time, the other congressman who was on Fox News and said, we need to level it into a parking lot. They all need to go. That guy isn't censured. So it's very obvious. They care about certain types of people other than the Palestinian people. And it's very clear. It's very clear. So they don't value civilian lives of Palestinians.
To us, any number above 0 is deeply troubling to us. What we are doing is we are working with our Israeli partners to ensure that steps can be taken to minimize the impact on civilian life. And we also have believed that there is a moral imperative, there is a strategic imperative to take steps to minimize loss of civilian life. I'm going to work through. I've answered like 4 of your questions. You could.
Dime Store Sagar. Now, I want to connect this to the Anna Kasparian statement that she made, because this brings up another issue in reference to genocide. Different group of people, different situation, but this is Anna, screaming about how she will not vote for Joe Biden in 2024. But I'm going to connect this to what Max Blumenthal said in reference to whether or not you declare something to be a genocide or not. Listen to this.
The George W. Bush administration condemned the Israeli government for doing an airstrike in Gaza that took out 1 Hamas militant but killed 14 other civilians. Think about how disgusting and devolved our country has gotten, where Joe Biden can't outdo the war criminal George W. Bush, where George W. Bush has more morality than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a disgrace. An absolute disgrace. I will not be voting for Joe Biden under any circumstance. I don't care about any other policy that he has championed. I cannot, as an Armenian American, support a president who has greenlit the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This, for me, is the red line.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a second. Let me just say something about the Armenian bit. So for those who may not have realized, I've known this, but Anna Kasparian is Armenian. Now, why am I connecting this to the Max Blumenthal story? Because there was a little event called the Armenian Genocide. Why am I bringing that up? Because it wasn't until 2019 when the US government finally decided to acknowledge the Armenian genocide. 2019. When Joe Biden assumed office in 2021, Joe Biden also agreed that, yes, there was an Armenian genocide. Do you see how long this took for this to happen? But the US government acknowledged it in 2019. Joe Biden wasn't even president in 2019, which means the acknowledgement happened under the Trump administration. So for Anna, this situation is a little bit more personal than it may be for others. This did happen to the Armenian people. That's also why if you pay attention, you notice you don't see as many Armenians. In Massachusetts, there is a town called Watertown. Not making this up. It's very funny, I know. Some of you may know about it because of the Boston Marathon bomber. That's where he was hiding at. That's a whole nother story. We'll do that another night. Watertown, Massachusetts actually has an Armenian museum. There aren't as many Armenians that live there now, but there used to be more. Like there was, a large Armenian community that lived in Watertown, Massachusetts. And the thing is that people got to understand is people that come from these populations where they've had entire family lines obliterated, this is personal for people like Anna. Now, reference to the voting for Joe Biden part, we'll have to see in 2024 because, Anna, she flip-flop, she might say one thing now and then next year, different story. But the connection also to the George Bush issue. Let's hear that part again. This is important.
Bush administration condemned the Israeli government for doing an airstrike in Gaza that took out one Hamas militant but killed 14 other civilians.
That was under war hawk George W. Bush. And look at where we are today. We have a Democrat president. The Democratic Party is supposed to be less war hawkish, but they're not. That's what's happening. That's what's happening now. What we have are two war parties.
Think about how disgusting and devolved our country has gotten, where Joe Biden can't outdo the war criminal George W. Bush, where George W. Bush has more morality than Joe Biden. Joe Biden is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. I will not be voting for Joe Biden under any circumstance. I don't care about any other policy that he has championed. I cannot, as an Armenian American, support a president who has greenlit the ethnic cleansing and genocide of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. This, for me, is the red line.
So for me, there were other things that, when I talk about red line issues, one of the issues with me was the Israel issue. And I've said this on multiple shows. I've said it on this show as well. Even before October 7th, I even said this last year on another podcast. I said, no. If you don't get that issue right, I'm not voting for you, period. Now, again, we'll have to see if Anna sticks by that. We'll have to see if she stands by that, because she may not. It is TYT. But I think it says something for even a co-host of TYT, which is very much Democrat, a co-host of TYT to say they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. And you compare that to people who were to the left of TYT saying that Joe Biden's doing a good job. We don't have to name any names. You guys can figure it out. You guys can figure it out. P Stuff said Armenians from Massachusetts all moved to Fresno, California. That's interesting. Interesting. I wonder why Fresno. Why Fresno? Interesting. But I think Venti Cafe. All right. So when you compare what Anna said to what Kyle Kalinski's been saying, I don't know. Maybe she may be on her way out. But the point is this. We had the Armenian genocide. We had the genocide of the Palestinian people. And there was the State Department confirmation that there was a genocide against the Uyghur people. But notice which one they're not willing to acknowledge. They acknowledge that there was Armenian genocide. They acknowledge that there's a Uyghur genocide. Although, like I said, the State Department had said before that evidence does not support that, but they were not acknowledged that there is a genocide that is happening to the Palestinian people, and over 10,000 people have been killed, a lot of them children. Something to think about.